Welcome to VCR, Vintage Cinema Rewind. We're bringing old movies to new viewers. I'm Blake.
And I'm Jason.
And we're doing Ghost? Question mark.
Yes, it was a strange pick for us, I think. But since we were doing romance, we wanted something that I guess we'd both kind of seen on the peripheral. Like it's been floating around as something that like was a classic romance movie. How do you feel about that?
Ghost is like a movie that's been in the zeitgeist, like in the culture since like 1990 when it came out.
Yeah.
So for us, it's a movie that has been around our entire lives, and it impacted the culture of the 90s in such a way that like the iconic scene of the pottery, the erotic pottery scene is like maybe one of the most well-known scenes of movies, period.
Yeah, I feel like I knew that scene so much that I was like, I didn't even know what movie, but it was from. But I knew the scene, and then once we were looking through like lists of movies for this episode, I was like, oh yeah, okay.
I'm pretty sure that at my house we have a copy of Ghost on VHS that's never been pulled out of its packaging. Like I think my grandma gave it to my mom or something like when I was a baby.
Wow.
And nobody in the house ever watched it, which is kind of hilarious. So I think let's get into the plot, and then I have some thoughts even on the plot.
Yeah.
And what this movie is, as opposed to like what people think this movie is, because those are two very different things, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Ghost is a 1990 romantic fantasy film directed by Jerry Zucker. The movie tells the story of a young man named Sam Wheat, played by Patrick Swayze, who, after being murdered, becomes a ghost and tries to communicate with his girlfriend, Molly Jensen, who's played by Demi Moore, through a psychic, Whoopi Goldberg, to protect her from his killers. Sam has to find a way to expose the truth, protect Molly, and navigate this whole spiritual world as a ghost. It's a blend of drama and romance, and with some supernatural elements that keep the audience engaged until the end.
Yeah, and so on that note, like, if you think that this is really just like a steamy romance film, boy, are you wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot happening in this film.
Yeah, I thought it was going to be similar to that Don't Put Baby in a Corner.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You don't know that movie? Oh, what is it?
No.
I have to look that up real quick. It's, again, Patrick Swayze in Dirty Dancing. That's it.
Okay. I actually haven't seen Dirty Dancing. It's one of the few Patrick Swayze movies that I have left.
Yeah, it's Nobody Puts Baby in the Corner. That's his like famous quote. So I thought it was more along those lines, like another one of those, and I was like happily mistaken.
And that's kind of the thing is like, I mean, the most famous scene, the pottery scene, happens in like the first 15 minutes of the movie, along with like a lot of the expectation of this movie is like built up in the first 15 minutes as to like somebody who has always known about this movie but has never actually watched it. I thought that the first 15 minutes were going to be basically par for the course for the next 2 hours, essentially.
Yeah.
And that was very much not the case, which is really cool. And I think we're going to talk about it a little bit more when we get into like the who is this movie for. I think right now let's maybe pivot into the characters and people you may know.
Yeah, awesome.
So our first important character, a central figure, is Patrick Swayze, playing the character Sam Wheat. Sam Wheat's kind of an investment bro, and they kind of present that in the first 20 minutes pretty well. Like they're making kind of jokes on the elevator together. Like they're kind of him and his other buddy who work at the investment bank together.
Yeah.
Very, very bro-y relationship.
Yeah, I was happy with the little bit of comedy at the beginning. Like I wasn't even sure if this was going to be a rom-com. Like I didn't know which direction it was going to go, and that started it out with some comedy where they're like just scaring everybody else in the elevator with like contagious like disease jokes.
Yeah, and boy does that hit differently in 2023, eh?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Oh man, I was like half like chuckling and half like whoof, like I wouldn't want to be in that elevator right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, so Patrick Swayze, I would say a household name. Patrick Swayze has kind of an interesting career because he's in a lot of these like very well received not necessarily the best movies ever made kind of thing.
Yeah.
Like every one of his movies you cannot say is an enjoyable movie. Whether it's like the greatest piece of art ever made is another kind of debate entirely. And so the movies that you might know Patrick Swayze from, they're all kind of older movies for the most part. His most famous are probably the movie Roadhouse, which is maybe the greatest bad movie ever made. Like it's so enjoyable, but like the plot is just completely nonsensical.
And I feel like the fighting is just ridiculous as well.
Yeah, it's a great movie. Like I had so much fun watching it, but I wouldn't say it was a great time. Like it was a good movie.
Yeah.
He did Dirty Dancing, which you already mentioned, Point Break. He was in Donnie Darko, which I forgot about, and I recently watched it like 6 months ago, and I went, oh, I think that's Patrick Swayze when he pops up in it.
I haven't watched that in a little bit. I have to rewatch Donnie Darko, but that's interesting who's in it.
The last thing that you might know him from, and this actually really surprised me, is The Outsiders. He plays Daryl Curtis, the oldest brother, which I just didn't put two and two together, and that was a really important movie to my teens. And a really important book to me, so I was like kind of mind blown about that.
That's kind of like how I came to know of him, and then I realized he was in all these old movies, like old 90s movies, but I didn't really know who he was. But yeah, I remember him in that.
Right. Yeah, and Patrick Swayze, like I guess Sam Wheat, the character of Sam Wheat, is pretty. It's a pretty unique role for him in this film because he's playing a ghost, so he's not the central action figure for most of the film, right? Like most of those movies, especially with like the movie like Roadhouse, like he is the main action star of that film. And so it's kind of a little bit outside of his wheelhouse because he's just kind of more like reacting to what the rest of the characters and what's happening in any given scene, which is kind of unique. It's kind of an interesting idea.
It might have like pushed him to the limit of his acting abilities potentially, and he did quite well.
Yeah, for the most part, like there's a few scenes where his acting made me laugh out loud because it wasn't necessarily on point. But,
exactly.
But that, you know what? That's part of the enjoyment of a film is some awkward acting. So our next main character is Molly Jensen, so the love interest of Sam Wheat. She is a sculptor, I would say.
An artist overall, yeah.
Yeah, an artist, yeah. And so her and Sam Wheat are in this pretty loving relationship. And so obviously when Patrick Swayze's character dies in the first 20 minutes of this movie, that's pretty heartbreaking. And we kind of follow her character and how she kind of responds to the situation. And so Molly Jensen's played by Demi Moore, another household name, I would say. And obviously this movie, with how important it is to the 90s, this movie is part of the reason why she's a household name.
Yeah, and she killed it. Like she's the only real actor in this, I feel.
She is, and maybe you and I can debate that later when we get into spoiler territory, because I think depending on what you want to get out of this movie, you may or may not like her performance the best.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in spoiler territory, though. So Demi Moore, you might know from A Few Good Men, Mr. Brooks, where she plays alongside Kevin Costner, and Deconstructing Harry, which is a Woody Allen movie. She's also was married to Bruce Willis, and that's why she's been a little bit more relevant the last year as well, because of all of Bruce Willis's unfortunate medical issues that he's been going through. They're still, even though they're not together anymore, it seems like they're very, very close. So our next main character is Oda Mae Brown. She's a sassy psychic, kind of a con artist. When we kind of are introduced to her, she's kind of putting on a show and doesn't really even believe in the psychic world at all.
But it has been passed down through her family. So
yes,
like she knew
just
it
thought
was
she
there.
was missed. Yeah.
And she's just using it to her advantage at the moment that we meet her.
And Oda Mae is played by Whoopi Goldberg. And this is maybe one of the greatest casting choices of all time, because Whoopi Goldberg just completely crushes this role. Like, she steals pretty much every scene she's in.
Yeah. And with very much, like, it's a nostalgia feeling when I see her on screen. Like, like it's like, I don't know, the Sister Act is like where I remember her most, and like she
Right.
feels the same while still like being much more adult, I guess, compared to Sister Act.
This is just a really great role for her, and when we get into maybe the spoiler territory more, we'll talk about her and Sam's relationship together, because that's at some point it almost feels like that becomes the focal point of the film.
Yeah.
Which is really strange for a romance film.
Yeah, like she's not just hanging back in like
No.
the background of these like essential scenes, you would think. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
And then our last main character to kind of build our roster here is Carl Brunner, and this is Sam Wheat's best friend, his coworker at the investment bank, and kind of I don't want to spoil too much about his character, even though it's pretty clear early on kind of where things are heading, I would say.
Yeah, he's Sam's best friend and very close with both of them as a couple. He's obviously has a little bit of interest in Demi Moore's character, I guess.
Like it feels like, you know, they're two best friends, and then he's also very well acquainted with Molly as well. And so when Sam becomes a ghost at that point, you know, like there's this grief, there's this like there's a lot of emotions in the air, and so there's things that kind of happen later on between those two characters.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the main cast, I would say. There's a couple of other characters that I want to mention, which they're just interesting performances. Vincent Chevalier plays the subway ghost.
Yeah.
He's got a very distinct face. He's got like very sunken eyes. He just kind of plays like, he's a character actor who plays like almost like borderline depressed characters. And he's been in over 120 films, including One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Amadeus, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, and Batman Returns. So you've probably seen him at some point in time in a movie that you've watched in your life.
Yeah, he's very recognizable.
Very recognizable. The other person that I noticed on screen, and I was kind of excited when he popped up, was Stephen Root.
Yes, that's exactly what I was just pulling up and was about to talk about. Like, he was very recognizable as well, but it took me like a few seconds to really connect it, because he's quite young in this compared to what we've seen him in.
Yeah, this is one of his first roles. I think he had a couple TV movie roles prior to this, but this is his first like big film role. He plays a cop in the movie, and you may know him from Milton from Office Space. He also plays Gordon in Dodgeball, and most recently he plays Monroe Fox in Barry.
Yeah.
Which is a great performance and great role in that show as well. Have you seen Barry?
I've seen a season or so. Maybe
okay,
2 seasons.
Yeah. I'm about a season as well. I think Mike's a big fan of that show.
It's a great show.
Yeah. It's really funny. It's probably like Bill Hader's best role ever.
Yeah.
So it's cool to see Bill Hader finally like, you know, find his perfect character and his perfect role.
Mm-hmm.
So to round things out with the director, so this is Jerry Zucker, and Jerry Zucker has a really, really interesting film career. I don't know if you looked at his career at all.
I haven't yet, but wow.
Okay,
he's
I'm
in
about
a lot.
to blow your mind. I'm about to blow your mind.
All right.
Jerry Zucker is also known as the writer-director of the film Airplane.
Yeah, that was crazy.
As well as Rat Race and Top Secret.
I loved Rat Race as a kid.
So did I. It was, and I actually watched it recently, and while it didn't quite hold up to like my childhood expectations, it was still like relatively funny.
Yeah, it was like enjoyable.
Yeah, exactly.
Some of it was played out, like it's that time is over now, but there's a lot of good comedy in there still. Yeah,
exactly. And so he's kind of a director that's known for like screwball parody comedies.
Mm-hmm.
And so this film is somewhat a departure from that. However, like I said, like if you're kind of expecting this film just to be a pure romance, prepare to be completely blown away, because there are definitely some aspects of his prior films that make it into this movie. Like there are some legitimately hilarious moments in this film.
Yeah.
I laughed out loud quite a bit during this film.
And again, some of it was just due to Patrick Swayze's poor acting, but some of it was also planned.
Well, but it's also maybe the relationship between his character and Whoopi Goldberg's character that I genuinely really enjoyed as well.
Yeah,
we'll talk about
that's
later.
fair, yeah.
So who's this movie for? And also, does this movie hold up to a modern watch? And so I'm gonna talk my experience going into this one a little bit. The first 15 minutes of this movie, I was sitting in the couch, probably slightly arms crossed, and I was thinking to myself, I don't know if I'm going to like this movie.
Yeah.
This movie is like very melodramatic in the first like 15 minutes. It really like hams up the fact that this movie is a romance and like an erotic romance. Like I was like, am I watching 50 Shades of Grey without like all of the real crazy sex stuff?
Yeah.
Is kind of how I felt in the first 15 minutes. And then the next 15 minutes after Patrick Swayze's character dies, I was fully invested. Like I bought into everything happening, and we're gonna talk about that a little bit. I think when we get into our personal reviews and the spoiler section. But the aspects of Patrick Swayze being a ghost really intrigued me, and some of the world building at that point in time. Like I said, I bought into everything.
Yeah, I have some questions, but I also they did it well for that time, like 1990, and they're using like not CGI, definitely not CGI, but like the camera,
Right.
like the special effects were pretty okay, and the only thing I would fault is a little bit of the acting.
Yeah.
And that also comes down to directing a little bit too, but other than that, it was easy to just get caught up in it, like to get into the movie though. Like it wasn't taking you out too much.
No, like the special effects, like I would say when Patrick Swayze dies, were like probably the worst special effects in the movie. I would argue because I actually enjoyed some of the special effects from later that I don't want to spoil in the film. But Patrick Swayze watching his own dead body lying on the ground, I was like, ooh, that doesn't look great in 2023. But otherwise, I was like, you know what? This movie, like, it holds up pretty well. Like the special effects, yeah, not all the special effects quite work, but in terms of being an enjoyable movie in 2023, I think there's something here still.
Yeah, I agree.
And so what's really interesting about this movie, and we've kind of hinted on this as well, is the movie kind of ebbs and flows between several genres. Like it really starts out as a romance and then kind of pivots into a fantasy film. And then at some point, it almost becomes like a crime thriller as well. So before eventually getting back into the romance to kind of wrap things up.
Yeah, it's all like weaved together very well without any like clunkiness or any like jumps or anything like that. Like it just flows, which is pretty nice. Like it keeps you in while it's still changing things so much.
Exactly. And like I think that this movie, there's going to be something for everybody in this one because of how many different genres it kind of crosses over with. If you're interested in the fantasy elements, the primary character is a ghost element, like there's something there for you. If you want to see some of the romance, like there's definitely some of romance in this film.
Very steamy romance.
Yeah, the buddy cop like crime thriller like section where it's like Patrick Swayze and Whoopi Goldberg together, like definitely a very key aspect of this film that made it successful. It's a movie that I could recommend to a lot of different people
as a throwback.
Yeah. If you're somebody who really isn't interested in like a movie that has bad special effects, like, you know what, there's like 2 times where the special effects don't necessarily hold up, but otherwise, like if those 2 times are going to ruin your viewing experience, then yeah, okay, maybe this movie isn't for you. But otherwise, like it's a pretty damn good movie. There's also like the aspect of the comedy to this movie is it's somewhat tongue-in-cheek kind of humor. Like it's cheesy while also being a little tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
And there's something somewhat enjoyable in a kind of a retro watch of this film with some of that holds up today as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's like a few points where at no point, I guess what I'm saying is, does it go over the top? Like it stays every like different genre section like stays limited. Like it could have got taken away with the comedy at some points or with like the drama at some points, but it gives you like a good amount of each. It's all very like digestible.
Yeah, agreed. Do you have any other recommendations for who this movie might be for?
I think again, like it's a couples movie for people that don't necessarily want to watch like a full-on romance
or a full-on comedy or thriller.
Yeah, like you just want something that it's just all the spots.
Yeah, It's a pretty easy watch, honestly. You could pop into this movie like 10 minutes in and you know, still get a lot of enjoyment out of this. You could walk in halfway through this movie and still be pretty invested in what's going on, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is kind of neat.
I wouldn't recommend it, but still. Yes.
No, but like, you know, if you're like back in the day
when it was on the TV and you're like, I'll give it a go.
Yeah, it's like 10 minutes in. Like, that's how I, as kind of a tangent here, that's how my experience with Forrest Gump was for almost my entire life. Like,
Me too.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever seen Forrest Gump from start to finish. I've always gotten in at certain points, and even maybe wrapped up at certain points too. Like, I might see like 20 minutes in the middle somewhere. And so I'm pretty sure I've seen that entire movie, but I don't think I've ever sat down and watched it in one sitting, which is kind of awesome.
I think you should, but like I have, but I remember like for a long time I didn't know the whole idea of who Forrest Gump was really, because I'd only seen bits when I don't
know
young.
If you and I were in the same class in high school when the teacher put on Forrest Gump, but there was a time when they put on Forrest Gump. I don't know if it was a substitute teacher or whatever. And so they were like, okay, we're going to watch this for the next like 2-3 days. And I ended up being sick or something for a day in the middle. So I literally never watched it from start to finish.
That's hilarious.
So when to watch? So I think you kind of alluded to this just now, that this movie is kind of a date night movie because it does have something for everyone while also not necessarily being like a full romance or a full rom-com.
I wouldn't call it date night, but I would definitely call it chill night in with your significant other.
Yeah, like maybe it might not quite make like the Valentine's Day best of movies ever.
I would say a Friday night, just a Friday night where you've had a long week. You don't want to get invested in anything too serious, but you want to see something classic. And like there's the romance involved, so it's just you and your partner watching. It's pretty enjoyable.
Yeah, like this is popcorn entertainment to a T.
Yeah.
I don't think it quite fits into like a Valentine's Day slot necessarily. Like you don't have to watch it around Valentine's Day, like something like When Harry Met Sally, which we talked about on the podcast last year, and how important that is to rom-com history, right?
Mm-hmm. This
one definitely has an interesting legacy with romance films that we'll talk about when we get into the spoiler section. But for now, I think that's kind of where we leave it at with that. Where to watch? Right now it is streaming on Paramount Plus, and that is where I watched it through Prime, and it was great through there. I really enjoyed it. I think that is it for the part 1 primer of our episode, and I forgot to mention this at the beginning of the episode, but like I've said for the last couple episodes, we're kind of testing out a new format, splitting the episodes into 2 and doing kind of like this is the before you watch spoiler-free as possible discussion of this movie and who it's for. And then we're going to cut it off here, and in a week you'll hear the full spoiler-full review and discussion of this film. So come back after you've seen it, and we'll discuss it further.
Yeah, enjoy your watch.
Yeah, absolutely.